Ethan Miller had always been the kind of man who found peace in quiet spaces. Yet, lately, even silence felt heavy. After his breakup with Daniel, a relationship that had spanned almost 6 years, Ethan couldn't escape the echo of betrayal that lingered in his mind. Every familiar street in Seattle reminded him of what he'd lost, the laughter, the promises, and the trust that had unraveled so easily. When Daniel confessed to cheating, Ethan hadn't shouted or cried. He had simply nodded, numb, as though he'd expected it all along. In the weeks that followed, he tried to fill the emptiness with work and routine, but nothing worked. He needed to breathe again, away from the noise and the memories. That was when he decided to leave everything behind and head into the wilderness. The plan was simple: 1 week of solitude. No phone. No reminders. No one to talk to but the trees. He loaded his old Jeep with camping gear, a journal, and enough food to last him the week. As he drove toward the mountain trail, he felt the city's concrete weight begin to fade. By the time he reached the forest entrance, the hum of traffic had disappeared completely, replaced by the whisper of the wind moving through pine branches. Ethan set up camp beside a lake that mirrored the sky like glass. It was early afternoon, and sunlight flickered through the leaves, painting golden shapes across his tent. He stood still for a moment, breathing deeply. The crisp air filling his lungs felt like medicine. The water rippled gently against the shore, and for the first time in months, Ethan felt something close to calm. That evening, he built a small fire. The smell of burning wood carried him back to childhood summers, when his father used to take him fishing in Oregon. Those were simpler times, before love had become so complicated, before trust had turned fragile. As the flames danced, Ethan opened his journal and wrote a few lines, not about Daniel, but about himself. About wanting to remember who he was before the pain. The night came quietly. Stars scattered across the sky, shimmering with a beauty that almost hurt to look at. Wrapped in his blanket, Ethan listened to the sounds of the forest: crickets, rustling leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. Each sound reminded him he wasn't entirely alone, even here. But loneliness wasn't what scared him. What scared him was the thought that he might never trust anyone again. Sleep came slowly. Dreams drifted between memories: Daniel's smile at a crowded cafe, the sudden confession, the silence that followed. When he woke before dawn, the world outside was tinted in silver light. Mist hovered above the lake, and for a moment, Ethan watched it swirl and dissolve, like ghosts finally finding rest. That he brewed a cup of instant coffee and sat by the water, watching the surface reflect the soft blush of morning. A feeling of renewal brushed against him, faint but real. Maybe this trip was exactly what he needed, not to forget Daniel, but to forgive himself for staying too long in something that was already broken. As the sun rose higher, Ethan decided to take a short hike. The trail curved through tall grass and wildflowers, each step crunching softly beneath his boots. He felt lighter somehow, his thoughts clearer. When he returned to camp an hour later, he noticed something new: a blue tent had appeared a short distance from his own. It was neatly set up, the kind of precision that suggested experience. That he hesitated for a moment, unsure how to feel about having a neighbor out here. He'd come for solitude, after all. But curiosity flickered through him. Whoever it was hadn't made much noise. Just as he turned back toward his own tent, a figure emerged from the trees, a man carrying a water jug, wearing a sun-faded cap and an easy smile. Their eyes met briefly. The stranger nodded in greeting, and Ethan, surprised by the unexpected warmth in that small gesture, nodded back. As the day wore on, Ethan found his thoughts drifting toward the man by the blue tent. He couldn't explain why. Maybe it was simply the novelty of another human presence in all this emptiness. Or maybe it was something quieter, something he hadn't felt in a long time, a spark of curiosity. That night, as he sat again by the fire, he caught himself wondering who the stranger was and what had brought him out here alone. The flames crackled softly, echoing his own unspoken thoughts. Ethan smiled faintly to himself, realizing he hadn't thought about Daniel all day. For the first time in months, he wasn't running from his past. He was walking toward something new, though he didn't yet know it had already arrived. The morning sunlight filtered weakly through half-drawn blinds, casting pale lines across the wooden floor of Ethan Rivera's apartment. He sat at the small dining table, a mug of coffee cooling beside his untouched breakfast. The room was quiet, too quiet, except for the ticking clock that seemed to mock the silence between him and the empty chair opposite him. Ryan had already left for work. He always did. No note, no goodbye kiss, just the fading echo of the door clicking shut. Ethan stared at the chair as if it might answer the questions that had begun to live in his chest. When did love start feeling like routine? When did us become me? The walls of their apartment carried memories, photographs from their early days together, all smiles and travel adventures. Now they looked more like ghosts of a time Ethan wasn't sure he'd ever get back. Ryan had become a man of meetings, deadlines, and late-night calls. They shared the same bed but not the same world anymore. That day began like any other until a simple notification on Ethan's phone interrupted the monotony. Your package has been delivered. He smiled faintly. He'd ordered a new sketchbook and some paints, a quiet indulgence to fill the empty evenings. But when he checked the doorstep, there was nothing there. Frowning, he scanned the hallway, no box in sight. A quick look at the delivery photo revealed the problem. His package had been dropped at 12B instead of 12A. He sighed. His new neighbor had just moved in a few weeks ago, someone he'd only glimpsed once in passing, a tall man with a camera slung over his shoulder and a confident smile. Ethan hesitated a moment before heading next door. He straightened his shirt, ran a hand through his hair, and knocked lightly. A few seconds later, the door swung open. Hey, said the man, his voice calm but warm. I was just about to come over. I think this belongs to you. He held out the small brown box. His name was written clearly on the label, Ethan Rivera. Ethan exhaled with relief. Yeah, that's mine. Thank you so much. No problem, the man said, smiling. I'm Mark. I just moved in. Looks like I've already made my first neighborly mistake. Ethan chuckled, feeling his shoulders relax. It's not your fault. The delivery guy must have mixed it up. Happens all the time. Mark leaned casually against the doorframe, studying Ethan with curious but kind eyes. Well, at least now I've met someone from the building. Everyone here's been kind of quiet. I guess we're all used to keeping to ourselves, Ethan replied. He noticed how natural their conversation felt, like he'd known Mark longer than the 30 seconds they'd spoken. Anyway, Mark said, handing him the package, hope the delivery mishap didn't ruin your day. Ethan smiled faintly. Actually, it made it a little better. For a moment, their eyes met, and Ethan felt something stir inside, a warmth he hadn't realized he'd been missing. He thanked Mark again and returned to his apartment, still holding the box but lost in thought that he placed it on the table, next to the cold coffee, and sat down. The air felt different now, lighter somehow, though he couldn't explain why. He glanced toward the window where rain had begun to fall softly against the glass. The sound was soothing, like a slow heartbeat. Hours later, when Ryan finally called, his tone was hurried. Hey, I'm staying late again. Don't wait up, okay? Sure, Ethan replied quietly. The line went dead before he could say anything more. He stared at his phone, then at the unopened package. He thought of Mark's easy laugh, the warmth in his voice. It wasn't attraction, not yet. It was something subtler, more dangerous, attention. The feeling of being noticed, of being seen. That night, as Ethan sketched by the window, the rain deepened outside, turning the city into a blur of glistening lights. He caught himself thinking about the brief encounter next door, the way Mark's presence had shifted the air, the way his voice lingered in memory. He told himself it was nothing, just a friendly neighborly moment. Yet, when he closed his sketchbook and looked at the quiet side of the bed, the truth pressed heavier against his heart. He whispered softly to the silence, it's strange how someone you barely know can make you feel less alone. The words hung in the room like a confession he hadn't meant to speak. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance, gentle, like a promise of storms yet to come, and as Ethan turned off the light, the last thing he saw was the shadow of the package still resting on the table, small, ordinary, and yet the beginning of something he didn't yet understand. Morning arrived with the slow gentleness of regret. The rain had stopped, leaving the forest damp and shimmering under thin strands of sunlight. The cabin was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old wood. Ethan woke early, his mind still tangled in fragments of the night before, Noah's words, the silence that followed, and the undeniable truth he could no longer ignore that he sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the faint sound of water dripping from the eaves outside. Everything felt heavier, as if the air itself had absorbed their unspoken confession. He wasn't sure what frightened him more, what had been revealed, or what it meant about himself. When Ethan stepped into the kitchen, Noah was already there, standing by the stove, making coffee. His back was turned, posture rigid, shoulders tight. He didn't look up when Ethan entered. "Morning," Ethan said, voice hesitant. "Morning," Noah replied softly, still facing the window. The usual warmth in his tone was gone, replaced by something cautious, fragile. Liam stumbled out of his room moments later, yawning loudly, breaking the tension without realizing it. "You two are up early," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Guess I slept through the storm." Ethan forced a smile. "Yeah, you did." Noah poured the coffee into 3 mismatched mugs and handed one to Liam, another to Ethan. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Ethan felt that same quiet electricity rush through him again, quick, uninvited, impossible to ignore. Breakfast passed in strained normalcy. Liam talked about plans for their drive back, the traffic, the weather, every topic safe and surface level. Ethan responded when necessary, but his mind drifted. Every glance toward Noah was a reminder of the space that had opened between them, and how easily it could break everything if either of them crossed it again. After clearing the dishes, Liam went outside to check the car. As soon as the door closed, Noah finally spoke. His voice was calm, but his hands trembled slightly. "About last night," he began. Ethan looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time that morning. "You don't have to say anything," Ethan said quickly, though he wanted him to. Noah shook his head. "No, I do. I shouldn't have said what I said. It wasn't fair to you." Ethan hesitated. "It wasn't wrong either." Noah's gaze softened. "Maybe not. But it complicates things." Ethan nodded slowly. "Things were already complicated. We just stopped pretending they weren't." For a moment, neither spoke. The silence carried an odd kind of understanding, one that didn't need words. Whatever had existed between them now lived in that space, quiet and unacknowledged but undeniably real. When Liam called from outside, they both startled slightly, breaking eye contact. "Car's ready." Liam shouted through the door, "Coming." Noah answered quickly. They packed their things in near silence. Every shared glance carried the weight of what couldn't be said. On the drive back, Liam filled the car with stories and laughter, trying to recapture the carefree rhythm from before. But Ethan barely heard him. His eyes occasionally drifted to the passenger seat, where Noah stared out the window, lost in his own thoughts. The forest gave way to the open road, then to stretches of farmland and quiet towns. It felt like traveling not just through distance, but through everything unspoken between them. When they finally reached the city, Liam dropped Ethan off first. "Good trip, huh?" Liam said, grinning. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "It was." Noah turned slightly, managing a small, uncertain smile. "Take care, okay?" Ethan nodded. "You too." As the car pulled away, Ethan stood on the curb, watching until it disappeared from view. A strange stillness settled over him, not emptiness, but acceptance. The trip had given him something he hadn't expected, not love, not closure, but truth. That evening, alone in his apartment, he opened his journal, something he hadn't done in years, and began to write. He wrote about how love sometimes arrives disguised as confusion, how silence can hold entire conversations, and how truth, once seen, can never be unseen. That he ended the entry with a line that felt like both confession and release. "That trip didn't break us, it revealed us." Sometimes, love doesn't ask to be understood. It only asks to be honest. He closed the journal and sat in the fading light, a faint sense of peace settling over him. Whatever had happened between him and Noah would remain theirs, a quiet story written between heartbeats, carried forward not with regret, but with understanding, and though that night changed everything, it also set me free.